So at Choson Exchange, we would bring entrepreneurs and academics and economists from all over the world to North Korea to run workshops and train North Koreans in business skills and economic policy. And that introduced us to a really wide range of people. Some of the things you notice are there's a clear generational divide. Young people seem much less ideological, much more pragmatic. People who have grown up entirely, or at least perhaps mostly, in a very marketized economy, people who have seen that the way to get ahead is to make money. And the way they would approach the topics we'd introduce would be really different to older people. There were definitely older people in their 50s or 60s who really were interested and plugged in. But the younger people, I think, recognized how precious and valuable the experience we were bringing in were. And so really we're trying to soak up as much as possible. I wouldn't actually teach entrepreneurship or economics. I am neither an entrepreneur nor an economist, but I would help prepare our volunteers who would come in by trying to give them context and helping them to shape their presentations to be relevant to a North Korean audience. We never really had anything censored, actually, but making content relevant was not always easy because our audience, the vast majority of them, really never or perhaps very, very rarely had used the internet. The vast majority had never, or perhaps at most a couple of times, had been abroad. And so there were huge knowledge gaps. One thing I would tell our volunteers is make the content 80% something they can use and maybe 20% bad news. And that bad news is letting the North Koreans know what they are missing out on by having such a closed system. And not having the freedom of communication and the freedom of access to information that other entrepreneurs in the world have. So on one occasion, we had a little breakout session with some guys from a company who were saying, we're making this optical recognition software. You're going to be able to point your phone or your tablet at a piece of paper with text, and then it'll translate it live. And the guy who was from the Bay Area, actually, who we were having this conversation with, said, oh, yeah, I have something like that on my iPad. And he showed them this product that had been out for a couple of years and was very advanced and very cheap. And these guys said, yeah, we didn't realize that this was out there already. And well, thank you. You've saved us quite a bit of time. They just didn't know what they were competing with in the outside world. And on top of that, they had no way to reach out to customers, right? If you're building a product in North Korea and you're not allowed to email or call or surf the web, who are you building it for? And so these people face a lot of challenges. Overall, I think in my experience, most people were not disloyal to their country. It is, after all, their country for all its flaws. But more and more people, I think, would like their country to be run more similarly to China and to have more economic opportunity. I think that is something that people really crave. I think North Koreans live with a ton of cognitive dissonance. They're constantly having to balance competing ideas in a way that is very stressful. They're in a system where clearly the things they see in their real life don't always match up with the things that they are taught by the state. But they have no real way to discuss those things that don't match up. And that, I think, puts them in a position where they have to internalize a lot of these contradictions and ignore them just in order to get by. And I think that's really, really stressful. guess my big takeaways from having spent so much time there is that's an incredibly difficult and oppressive part of a dictatorship that I think most of us in more free Western countries really struggle to understand. I think we can imagine being unjustly punished for something, but I don't think we know what it's like to constantly be regulating our own thoughts in case those thoughts become dangerous. And in a way, I think that's the far more insidious and disturbing feature of life in a dictatorship. I don't want to say that we don't have any dissonances. I think, again, part of being conscious of Orientalism is to be aware of how we are similar to people from really vastly different cultures. There are plenty of us who are concerned with social justice and poverty, but buy a second house, or, you know, love our pets, but also eat meat. You know, there's plenty of things that we choose not to think about because the contradictions are too difficult. But I do think in their system, those contradictions are not only emotionally difficult, but they can be dangerous to your life and your livelihood. And so the pressures to ignore or, you know, in some way even lie to yourself are really severe. North Korea is a really stressful place, and it's a place that you have to take seriously when you visit, because there are consequences for things that you say and the way that you act that don't exist in other countries. On the other hand, if you're completely serious and humorless all the time, I think you just lose your mind. And so I would try as much as possible to bring some levity to our proceedings and to our travels. I met a lot of North Koreans resident in Japan over the years, and they're a very interesting bunch because they're at once North Korean, but also they are not. They're not as foreign as us, but they're also not treated entirely like somebody that has grown up in the DPRK. And once I had a chance to hang out with a young group, one of whom was kind of suspicious of me, didn't really trust me, but nonetheless invited me to do an interview for his Japanese Korean Business Association that he was going to show at their next conference. So stupidly, an hour before our appointment, I thought I would try to squeeze in a bit of a workout. By this time, I developed a personal rule for Pyongyang: exercise every day. Without it, the stress of constant group activity and surveillance could pile up. Many visitors, residents, and indeed North Koreans offset these pressures by drinking, but that creates a downward spiral of productivity and well-being. The other rule I developed was that each trip I'd take one evening off from the group to watch a movie on my laptop and have some time alone. This time, however, the exercise was a mistake. I didn't leave myself enough time to cool down, so when I showed up to the interview, I was sweating like a drug addict at rehab. I looked, I'm sure, like a panicky wreck. The first few questions were friendly and innocuous, but then the wrestler started dropping inquisitorial bombs. What do you think of our socialist system? His annoyed face was back. He was trying to catch me out, to get me in trouble. Listen, I said, I think there's a lot of good ideas that are very positive, but there are also some limitations and many things that are inefficient. So I'd like to help improve those things so the country can develop. He then asked, which do you like better, North or South Korea? My God, going for the jugular. Maybe it was better that I was sweating already. Otherwise, I might have started to at this point. I'm lucky to have been to both, I replied quickly. And for me, it isn't about which one is better or worse. I like them both in different ways. I want to think of ways that the international community can help the two countries work more closely together and find more in common. He nodded his approval as I wiped my brow again. That was a good answer, his facial expression said. I added the sweeter, crunchier kimchi in the north is better, but the noodles are better in the south. This is why they need to work together. We laughed and good-naturedly argued about whether that was the case. I stand by that controversial claim, despite a popular song called Pyongyang Cold Noodles Are Best and the existence of a cold noodle research center in the city, implying Northerners are not resting on their laurels. There's a lot of propaganda about Northern cold noodles. Don't fall for it. The collapse of this peace process that sort of began in 2018 and has now seemed to be ended by mid 2020, I think it was incredibly disappointing to me and also to the people I know in North Korea who were really hoping that their position in the world would change and that they would have a lot more opportunities and access. I think fundamentally making peace is a risk, and those risks on our side are political, and for the North Korean leadership, it's more than just political. It's a matter of literal life or death for them. If they get things wrong, if they lose control, things could change very, very rapidly, and I think that's something they always think about. And fundamentally, the system that they know how to run is this incredibly closed, tight system. They don't really know how to unravel that. I think the combination of that, plus the fact that China's interests are and probably will continue to be for our lifetimes in having a North Korean state independent and not close to the United States, means that at some point we are going to have to make a deal with the North Koreans. And that deal that should move us towards peace will not be everything that we wish, right? There will be compromises. And the difficult thing is the North Koreans are also going to have to make compromises and make changes too. And so finding a North Korean leadership that's willing to do that at the same time as a US president and Congress really that is willing to do that is going to be tough. So it's not hopeless. I've been reading a lot about Northern Ireland the past few months, and there also it was decades and decades of stakeholders on all sides saying we can never trust, we could never make a deal with those people. Any kind of compromise means death for us and our people. And they tried talks and they failed, and they tried talks again and they failed, and ceasefires failed, and until eventually enough changed that leaders on all sides were willing to take a risk. And that opened up an imperfect but still superior peace to what the people in Ireland were living in before. And so I'm hopeful that even though I think this window now is really closed, the 2018 to 2020 window now, that has passed us by. Maybe we've moved the needle a little bit so that next time there are leaders willing to talk to each other, there will be a greater chance that they'll take those risks. As it happens, the framed picture to my left here is from the first images of Korea that would have been seen by a British audience in 1887 in a newspaper report sketched out by an artist. Now, and I wonder what those people must have thought looking at these Koreans with different practices and dress and different values and social structures. And as I was working on this project, I was struck by how we're still almost a century and a half later kind of stuck with the same challenge. We are peering in and we get these rare glimpses of North Korea, which intentionally cuts itself off and makes itself difficult to understand for the outside world, the same way that Choson era Korea did for centuries. And as a Westerner, approaching a difficult to understand and intentionally obscure country, what kind of responsibilities do we have? You know, where is that point at which you're describing a place fairly, if not on its own terms, because those terms are incredibly problematic, but not entirely on our own terms, where we are judging them entirely from our own experiences, which are vastly different. I don't know that I have a good answer, but I think part of the process of recognizing that we're not approaching this issue from an objective place, and neither are they, I think is an important one. So I try to include that sort of caveat. At the end of the book, though, we don't want to mess up the narrative with a bunch of academic waffling about justice and Orientalism. Three gigantic stone fists hold a brush, hammer, and sickle, casting over us a shadow of respite from the summer sun. The stones were also providing shelter from the group of tourists we've been shuttling about. They were around the corner, listening to a guide in traditional dress drone on about which stones symbolized what exactly and on what auspicious date this Party Foundation monument was completed. Behind the monument stand two apartment buildings, crimson red and tapering upward. They suggest the image of a gigantic flag fluttering and framing the political monument. It was the end of a long trip, and the guide, Boksun, and I had grown quite close. Over hundreds of kilometers of bumpy roads, we had mediated cultural misunderstandings, but had also had intimate conversations. We chatted about dating, marriage, freedom, travel, peace, and politics. We had sore feet and bags under our eyes, though hers were hidden by imported makeup and a pair of sunglasses. "What are you doing around here?" I asked, stepping further into the shadow. She wasn't checking her phone or reading anything, just standing. "Taking a minute," she said. Minutes alone were rare, and tomorrow she'd be sending me and the others off before picking up another group. We looked down, just the hum of cicadas and the distant explanations about the monument filling the air. The crackle and grind of a street tram in the distance. I hesitated, trying to weigh up the value of leaving things unsaid. It's so hard to say goodbye here, I decided on, because in this place, you have to assume it's forever. She brought her left hand up to her mouth, her whole face now concealed. Was she overcome by the notion of missing me? Or was it the countless forever goodbyes she'd said before? Someone specific she was remembering? Or something else entirely? Or nothing at all? I couldn't tell because she'd hidden her face. For 5 or 6 seconds, the neighborhood grew quieter, the gray of the monument grayer, and her yellow jacket sunnier. And then she took her hand away. Her expression was calm, neutral. She and I would not be able to write one another, not be able to share the poems and articles we'd written on social media, nor share pictures of birthdays or food items that had become our in-jokes.